welcome to The Well Invested Life. My name is Vincent Zimmerman, and on this show, I will talk about real estate investing and investing in ourselves in order to improve our lives. This is the very first episode of the podcast, and today I will talk about how real estate changed my life. I'm a new real estate agent, and I decided to become an agent because I want to help people invest in real estate. I truly believe that anyone can use real estate as a tool to build wealth. So I want to start off by sharing my backstory, how I got into real estate, and some of the lessons that I learned along the way. Let's go way back to 2008, when the United States was in the middle of a financial crisis. I was in college at Ohio State, majoring in electrical and computer engineering. I chose this as a major because I was good at math and science. My dad was an engineer, and I think it's natural for us to follow in our parents' footsteps. It seemed like a logical choice at the time when I thought I knew everything, but really I knew nothing about how the world worked. The summer before I graduated college, I was lucky enough to get an internship with a construction engineering company called Bechtel. I learned a lot that summer, and they offered me a full-time position when I graduated in the spring of 2009. I felt very lucky to have this opportunity because in 2009, the United States was in the middle of a recession, and a lot of people I knew at that time were having a hard time finding a job. So I went to work as an instrumentation and controls engineer on a construction project in Louisville, Kentucky. I literally had no clue what an instrumentation and controls engineer did when I accepted the job, but over time I learned. It was a very demanding job because the construction project was near completion, and so it required us to work 12-hour days a lot of the times for 6 or 7 days a week just to maintain the project schedule. Any mistake could result in a significant delay, which added a lot of pressure. It was around the end of this project in 2011 when the first thought of real estate popped into my mind. You see, when working on these remote projects, my company would pay a living away from home allowance, which is like a per diem, but you had to have a home that you were living away from. This allowance was around $2,000 a month, so this was really motivating for me to want to buy a house. I started looking online in the Cincinnati area and found a couple that I liked in Newport, Kentucky. I don't remember how, but I ended up working with an agent from Coldwell Banker, which just so happens to be the brokerage that I'm working with now as an agent. The housing market was still recovering from the 2008 real estate crash, although I had no idea there had even been a crash. It was not hard at the time to find a good deal on a home, and I bought a house with 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a 2-car garage. At the time, I knew nothing about how to buy a home, but the agent was really good about walking me through the entire process. From writing the offer to the home inspections to negotiating what the seller would fix or credit, she hooked me up with a lender who made it easy to secure financing and finally closing the deal. I remember thinking that the whole process was way easier than I imagined it would be. This was the first home I ever bought, and I still own it today, even though I've never actually lived in it. When I bought that house, the project in Louisville was winding down, and so I was preparing to move to a new project in southern Illinois near St. Louis. So I needed somebody to stay in the home while I was away. I didn't think of myself as a landlord or as an investor at the time. I had several friends who were going to school at Northern Kentucky University, which is only about 10 minutes away from the house, so it seemed like a perfect plan to have them move in and stay there while they were going to school. I did charge them some rent money, but it was way less than what I could have rented the house for. Like I said, I wasn't trying to be a landlord. I was getting the living away from home allowance. They were covering the utilities and most of the mortgage, so I was happy to have them there. I even bought a pool table for the basement, and I was excited for every weekend I got to come back and visit. They were happy to have an inexpensive place to live close to school. It was a win-win. In St. Louis, my dad and I were both actually working on the same project at the same time, so we decided to live together. This is the first time I lived with my dad since I was a very young child. And it was a good experience. My dad was away at work most of the time as I grew up, so this was a good chance for us to really get to know each other as adults. The project there was very similar to the project in Louisville, in that it was very demanding, fast-paced, and required long hours. For the most part, I embraced the hard work and did really well in that environment. Both of these projects required me to manage a team of technicians, mostly men who are a lot older than me. They weren't always thrilled to be taking direction from a 24-year-old kid who barely knew what he was talking about. I had to learn how to build trust with him, and I tried to do that by showing that I was willing to do whatever it took to get the job done. I tried to be out in the field with the guys as much as possible for several reasons. One, to really learn and understand what the heck was going on. There's no better way to learn than to get your hands dirty. Two, to build a good relationship with the technicians, who I had to rely on to do the tasks that needed to be done for our group to be successful. Once they trusted that I understood them and what it actually took to get the job done, it made it much easier for me to provide the direction and support that allowed us to be successful. Hard work was something that I realized early in life gave me an advantage. I could feel how the people around me respected the hard work that I had put in, so I embraced that feeling, and it encouraged me to give everything my best effort. And this is a feeling that I remember feeling as a teenager when I was working on farms in Brown County, Ohio. I would help local farmers cut and hang tobacco, which is not easy work. I remember one guy saying, "You do pretty good work for a Lake Winoka boy." Lake Winoka is a gated lake community in the middle of Brown County, Ohio, which is a rural area surrounded by farmland. It felt good to exceed their expectations. I spent several summers working on my good friend Jeff's dairy farm, and I think that's where I really learned to value a good day of hard work. There's just something really gratifying about spending hours out in the field, and at the end of the day, when the sun is setting, the field's all clear and the hay stacked in the barn. It feels really good. I'm glad I had those summers on the farm to really develop a good work ethic. My parents were both always hard workers. My brother, sister, and I all lived with my mom growing up, and she always worked in a factory of some sort. Sometimes working second or third shift, always doing whatever she had to do to make sure we had food on the table. My dad was always away at work, sacrificing time with us so that he could earn the money to make sure we had everything we needed and then some, and to make sure we were able to get a good education. My parents are very different people, and they didn't stay married, but the one thing they both have in common is that they value hard work. And that was definitely instilled into me, as well as my siblings, who both turned out to be wonderful humans. The three of us are very lucky. Anyway, I continued working as an engineer, and the St. Louis project came to an end. And then I moved out to the Bay Area in California in 2012. Living in California was fun for the year that I was there, but I was not too upset when the project ended and I had to leave. While I was there, I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with another guy, and we paid $2,500 a month for rent, which seemed insane at the time. But 1-bedroom apartments were $1,800 a month, so we were both saving money by splitting the 2 bedrooms. After the California project ended in 2013, I was offered a unique opportunity to take a position in northern Alberta, Canada. The position was a 2-week on, 2-week off rotation, and they would fly me back to Cincinnati for my 2 weeks off. I was excited to be able to spend some time in my hometown. The same people were still living in my house in Newport, and I didn't want to kick anyone out, so I decided I would buy another house. I wanted to buy a fixer-upper that I could work on during my 2-week off rotation. I didn't have anything else to do during this time off, so it seemed like a perfect plan. In 2014, the housing market in Northern Kentucky had not yet recovered from the 2008 crash. It took me a couple months, but I finally found a bank-owned home that was a 3-bed, 2-bath for sale for $40,000. There were no structural or other major issues with the home, so I bought it. It was only about 2 miles away from my other house in Newport, so it seemed perfect. I moved into 1 bedroom. My brother and his girlfriend at the time moved into another bedroom, and my friend Ryan moved into the 3rd bedroom. At this time, I still had no idea how to be a real estate investor. I only got the idea because my dad and my uncle had partnered to flip a house the previous year, and it seemed to go pretty well. But I was not involved with that one at all. I really had no clue what I was doing, but I was confident that getting the house for $40,000 was a great deal, and chances that I would lose money on the deal were very low. Now looking back, I figured out how to house hack before I'd ever even heard the term. If you're not familiar with this term, house hacking is a great way for anyone to get started in real estate investing. It is where you buy a home as a primary residence and you rent out the other bedrooms. This can allow you to greatly reduce or even eliminate your largest living expense, paying rent or mortgage, and basically live for free. Another way to house hack is to buy a multifamily property like a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex, and you live in one unit and you rent out the other units. Either of these methods are a great way to start saving money and building wealth. The house really only needed cosmetic updates, so I got to work. I learned how to do things by watching YouTube. I refinished the hardwood flooring, which I had to do twice because I messed it up the first time. I installed crown molding. I painted everything inside and out. I installed new kitchen cabinets. I installed tile flooring and a tile shower in the main bathroom. I built some built-in shelves in the living room and added some decorative stone in the fireplace. I even installed a retaining wall and landscaping in the front yard because there was a really steep hill in the front yard, which was impossible to mow. It took me about 2 years of working on these projects one at a time, flying back and forth to Canada for 2 weeks at a time. It was a really interesting time in my life, being able to work in Canada on a massive oil extraction project where the weather was crazy. The temperatures got down to negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter. The people up there were great. Canadians really live up to the stereotype of being very nice people. I got to work with so many awesome people. I got to drive a 6-wheeled ATV that we called an Argo out in the middle of the brush, and yes, there were bears, out to oil wells to set up communication devices. I worked with smart computer programmers from all over the world: Korea, Japan, India, England, and of course Canada. I lived in a huge camp on site where they provided 3 meals a day. Food was pretty good, and it was a different meal every day. Then I would fly back home, get to hang out with my friends and family for 2 weeks while I learned to do construction. It was a really fun time. The only downside was the travel. It would take anywhere from 10 to 14 hours each way, usually with 2 layovers. Several times I got stuck in Chicago or Toronto due to snow delays. I slept in airports more than once. The travel was exhausting, and after 2 years of that rotation, the project wound down and I was released. I was ready for a change at the time, but I had no idea what I would do next. I was released in December of 2015. My company didn't have another project lined up for me at the time, so they put me on holding status, which basically meant that I keep all my benefits and my employment status, but I no longer get a paycheck and I don't have to work. So I decided to spend the winter of 2016 in Salt Lake City, Utah, where I could ski every day. I did some research and found a place to stay for $500 a month, which is at the base of Little Cottonwood Canyon, where 2 of the best ski resorts in the country are located, Snowbird and Alta. I had a friend who lived in Salt Lake, and she worked in the ski industry, and another friend who just happened to be working out there at the same time on an internship. So it was perfect. I spent most of the winter skiing almost every day. It was fantastic. I've always loved skiing, but that winter I really improved my ability and got to explore those mountains like I never had before. Utah was a cool place, and I really enjoyed my time there. I seriously considered leaving my job and staying there long term. One day I was going up a ski lift, and I got a call from a random number. It was my HR department, wanting me to go to a new project in Louisiana. Now, I've been to Louisiana, and it's an okay place. Great Cajun food for sure, but nothing like the mountains of Utah that I'd just fallen in love with. I told them I'd have to think about it, and a couple days later, they called me back, and I told them I could not accept the position. The department manager called me later and tried to convince me to take the position, but I couldn't do it. I knew if I took the position to be back to be working in the same environment I was in before I went to Canada. Long hours, fast-paced, high stress, and then the project would end after 12 to 18 months, and they would just send me somewhere else. That type of lifestyle does not allow you to have a family, which was something I was starting to think about more and more at 30 years old at the time. And really, there's not much life at all outside of work. The money's good, but the lifestyle is not what I was looking for at the time. So I turned down the position, but I was technically still employed with the company. And they have dozens of projects all over the world. So I had to make a decision if I wanted to find another project that would work better for me, or if I wanted to leave the company and find somewhere in Salt Lake to work. I researched engineering positions in Salt Lake, as well as other projects with Bechtel, and I discovered a Bechtel project in Kentucky. There was an engineering position available that I was qualified for. The work schedule was not as demanding as other previous project I was on, just due to the nature of the project. It was less than 2 hours from Cincinnati, so I would still be able to spend some time up there. It seemed like a good fit, so I applied for the job, I nailed the interview, and 2 weeks later, my winter wonderland vacation was over. The project in Kentucky was a chemical demilitarization plant, which is a project funded by the U.S. federal government to destroy the chemical weapons that were built during World War II. I only worked 40 hours a week for the most part, and I got to spend a lot of time up in Cincinnati. I still had 2 houses up there with friends living in them. I was making just enough from them to pay for all the expenses, but still wasn't interested in being a profiting landlord at the time. I kept the room available for me to stay when I went up to visit. It seemed like it could be a long-term situation until there were massive budget cuts to the project and they had to lay off a huge portion of the staff. Since I was one of the newer employees on the project, I was one of the first to get let go. I was bummed I wouldn't be able to work on the project any longer, but they offered me an opportunity to work on another government project in Tennessee, which was a modernization of the Manhattan Project. They offered me a permanent position, which included a relocation package that would cover the expenses for me to sell my house, like closing costs and realtor commissions, and buy a new one. This was a great deal I felt like I needed to take advantage of, so I decided to sell the house that I had fixed up while I was working in Canada. I hired an agent to help me list it and sold it for around $75,000. So I had paid about $40K and I had put about $20,000 into the rehab. It wasn't a home run flip by any means, but I had almost no living expenses for the 2 years that I lived there, and I didn't pay any commission to sell the house. All in all, it was a great deal for me, and now I had $75,000 to put towards a new house in Tennessee. Now that I had some idea of how to rehab a home, I wanted to buy another fixer-upper. I wanted something I could work on while I lived there. I ended up finding a house on a lake for sale that needed a good amount of work. It was a 3-bed, 2-bath with a walkout basement and a large deck. Every room needed to be renovated. There were trees that needed to be removed. The dock was falling apart. I would have my work cut out for me, but I decided to take it on, and I bought the house. I basically worked on it almost every weekend for the first year I lived there. And it was during this time that a good friend of mine introduced me to something that would have a massive impact on my life. Something I'd heard of, but I'd never realized how valuable it could be. A podcast. I don't want to make this too long, so I'm going to stop here for today. Thanks for listening, and let me know what you think. Reach out on Facebook or Instagram if you want to talk about how you can get involved in real estate investing, or if you need help buying or selling a home. I will continue my story next week, and I hope you'll tune in. Bye, everyone.